The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." He replied to him, "Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbitrator?" Then he said to the crowd, "Take care not to guard against all greed. For though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions." Then he told them a parable. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, "What shall I do? For I do not have space to store my harvest." And he said, "This is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. Then I shall store all my grain and other goods, and shall say to myself, 'Now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Thus will it be for all who store up treasure for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God." The Gospel of the Lord.
When I was a younger man, basically the same age as you guys, Sam and Brandon, I used to love watching The Simpsons. And after the 10th season, it's no good, but before that, it's really a good show. I think there's like 30, I just created controversy, I know. But I had to look it up because I remember this quote in this scene. It was season 9, episode 4, back in 1997. And walking down the road was the character known as Comic Book Guy. He was, as you picture, a comic book salesman, overweight, self-indulgent, and deeply cynical. And he was walking down the road, eating a hot dog in one hand and reading a comic book in the other. And he says, he's reading the comic book out loud, reasoning with it. He says, "But Aquaman, you cannot marry a woman without gills." Meanwhile, a neutron bomb is coming straight at Springfield. And then he says, "Oh, I've wasted my life." Right? Comic book guy he realized at that point when he saw his life flash before his eyes that he had concerned himself with things that are passing, things of this world that ultimately do not matter in the end. And that's the message of all three of these readings today. What are we concerning ourselves with? Are we concerning ourselves with that which is ephemeral or that which is eternal? The first reading today is from the book of Ecclesiastes. This is the first and only time in all the Sunday readings of all three lectionary cycles that we read from this book. It's a book that if you read it alone, you'd walk away feeling somewhat down or depressed or in despair, because it takes a very philosophical view about the nature and the passing nature of this life. In fact, the term vanity does not quite translate into what we think of vanity, of somebody being vain or something that is overly concerned with beauty, but it translates more the Hebrew word that's used, haval, into vapor. Think of vapor, something that is there, but then it's not. And this person, Koheleth, says, "Vanity of vanities, all things are vanity." You know, what is our preoccupation in this world? Is it of things of the material or things that are immaterial? St. Paul, in his letter to the Colossians, continues with this theme. This is the theme in all the readings today. He says, "Think of what is above, not what is on earth. And then he says, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Now, we don't think of ourselves as dead, right, as Christians. But when we were baptized not only into Christ's life, but baptized into his death. You know, today, the way we baptize babies is by pouring. We baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And if you want to take in a second Mass this weekend, tomorrow at 11, we're baptizing a little baby during the Mass. But the old way of baptizing, and it's still valid today, is by immersion. Immersion is, think of dunking, right? You actually, the priest would submerge the person in the water. The connection to death is much more apparent with submersion. It's almost like we're drowning ourselves from this former way of life, only to be reborn into Christ. So when St. Paul says to do away with, he actually says put to death those things that are earthly, he's talking about all those things that are not eternal, all those things that are ephemeral, and in some cases, sinful. And the gospel, of course, expands on this even further. It starts with a conversation. Jesus, as we know, is a rabbi. He's having this conversation, as rabbis would, with the people. And somebody asks him a question. They don't really just ask him a question. They make more of a demand to him. It says, teacher, tell my brother to share his inheritance with me. Have you ever had family members fight over an inheritance? I've seen it. I've seen it in my own extended family. Not, like it's ugly. It's pretty bad when people, out of greed or jealousy or this thought that, well, why wasn't I left this item or this amount of money? Are they ever fighting over spiritual things? Probably not. They're fighting over who gets what cut of the material wealth of the deceased, usually parent. And so he thinks that Jesus is going to say, okay, brother, you give him this. No. Jesus said, I'm not the judge of this. But then Jesus gave a parable, as Jesus always does. He taught in parables because these stories, these seemingly simple stories, of course, always have manifold meanings. And this one is very interesting. It's this man who has a bountiful harvest, right? Land, a source of wealth, food. You think of food insecurity today, it was tenfold or 100-fold back then in Jesus' time. And this man has so much stuff that his current barn can't contain it. So he has to build a bigger barn. Perhaps we have a house that can't contain all of our stuff. We might think we need a bigger house or a bigger garage for our new car. And so what does he then say? He says, now I can rest, eat, drink, and be merry. Every time I read that line, it's only probably people in my generation, I think of that Dave Matthews song, right? Tripping Billies, right? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you shall die. It's kind of a hedonistic thought. This notion that we get as much satisfaction as we can in this life, and then that's where our end should be. But no, Jesus then says, God says to him, your life is now going to be demanded of you. And we've all experienced someone we know, someone we love or care about, who died unexpectedly before their time, seemingly. And, do we measure those people, and in fact everyone who dies, do we measure how big their bank account is at the time of their death? Do we know, if we go into a cemetery, who was the wealthiest person in the cemetery, who was the most successful? Maybe their descendants will try to build one of those big obelisks or something like that, but are those things ultimately important? The answer, of course, is no. One man who certainly knew the value of life because he was unfortunately and wrongly put into a prison camp for many years was the great Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He wrote Gulag Archipelago. He said the following. He said, "People exhaust themselves in the pursuit of material things and die without realizing their spiritual greatness." Friends, part of being Christian and living the Christian life is to seek things that make us spiritually great, that we are called to build up a treasure in heaven, not on this earth. That is not to say that money is bad. We're not saying that. We're not taking a vow of poverty here, unless that is our call, like certain monks and religious sisters. But we are called to put what is spiritually good ahead of all earthly possessions. Are we working on our souls to make sure that they are aligned with God's will for our life? Are we doing all we can to put God first instead of material success, instead of the size of our 401k, instead of making sure we have the latest or greatest, whatever gadget it is that is the envy of our neighbors? These are all questions that each of us has to ask in our own way. I think of even my own life, how much preoccupation I have with collecting baseball cards, as cheesy as that sounds. It does sound cheesy, that's why you laughed. And Pope cards, you knew that though, from a previous homily. These things are okay to do, but when things that are not of God become the priority and God takes a back seat, that's when it's time to stop and reevaluate, to ask God, what can I do to put you first in my life? Because ultimately, what matters is not what we earn or our title at the time of our death. What matters is the good that we've done here on earth for others. Have we put God first and loved our neighbor as deeply as we can? Those things are the most important, and those are the things that Jesus will let us know that we've done a good job when he says those beloved words to us and welcomes us home into heaven. Ultimately, that's what matters most. Not the vanities, not the baubles, not the things of this world. But what it means to be Christian is to show forth the love that God has for each of us.